I never believed a single glance could stop time, until the day I saw her in the hallway. The scent of her perfume faint but undeniable, wrapping around me like a soft warmth I didn't want to escape. She was leaning against the doorway, her posture relaxed but deliberate, fingers tracing the edge of the frame. Graceful, confident, yet there was a subtle weight to her gaze, a vulnerability I couldn't place but instinctively recognized. She was older, mid-40s, with lines that whispered stories I would never know, and eyes that seemed to measure me, not dismiss me. I wanted her to see me as I saw her, alive, intricate, unreachable, yet suddenly attainable. I hesitated in the hallway, feeling the hum of quiet tension between us. My hand brushed against the wall, thinking I could distract myself from noticing how close she was, but the space between us felt impossibly small. Her presence filled it entirely, like sunlight slipping through a narrow window. Unavoidable, warming, blinding all at once. "Morning," she said, voice low, controlled, yet something quivered in it. Not enough to break the confidence, but enough that I caught it, and my chest tightened. "Morning," I replied, more than once, like the first word might anchor me here, or keep me from floating into her orbit. She leaned a little closer, not touching me, yet the air between our bodies seemed to bend, compress, charged. I noticed the faint brush of her hand as she adjusted the strap of her bag, a gesture so small, so ordinary, but I felt it like a spark. My pulse caught, my fingers itched to reach out, to trace that same line she had just smoothed over. There was a silence after, long enough for the unspoken to speak. I wanted to ask 1,000 things. Where had she been all my life? Why had she just arrived in mine? Why was her nearness already something I craved? But instead, I just watched her. The slow tilt of her head, the way her lips pressed together as if holding something back. I wondered if she noticed how I noticed her, how my eyes lingered too long on her hands, her hair catching the light, the faint curve of her smile that arrived only in fragments. "You live here?" she asked finally, but her voice carried an unasked question, like she was testing me. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice steady, though I wanted to confess everything, that I'd been watching the way she moved down the hall earlier that week, that I'd imagined this very moment more times than I could count. She leaned back slightly, a tiny smirk tugging at her lips, eyes locking with mine in that slow, deliberate way that made me feel both seen and exposed. "If you want me," she said, almost as if she was answering a question I hadn't asked, "prove it." I felt the words echo inside me, matching the quick rhythm of my pulse. The air seemed to thicken, our bodies close enough that I could sense her warmth, the faint brush of her hair against her shoulder, the subtle weight of her presence pressing into the hallway like gravity. I opened my mouth, intending to reply, to say something clever or brave, but nothing came. My tongue felt heavy, my thoughts scattered. I only managed, finally, "Tell me how." Her eyes flicked to mine, sharper now, glinting with challenge. And then, just as the tension was about to become unbearable, the hallway door creaked open behind me. A draft rushed in, breaking the moment, but leaving a residue, a pull, a weight neither of us could ignore. She didn't move, didn't speak. I didn't either. And for a heartbeat, the world outside the hallway ceased to exist. I couldn't stop thinking about that hallway, about the tilt of her head, the unspoken dare in her eyes. She had a way of existing in the space around me that made everything else fade, and I hated how much I wanted it. She had moved in a few weeks ago, but there was an air of permanence to her that hinted at history. I had caught glimpses of photographs in her apartment, a man smiling beside her, a younger version of herself laughing freely. I didn't ask, didn't want to. The images alone were enough to trace the faint scars she carried, and I sensed it in the way she sometimes flinched when someone knocked too loudly, or how she avoided long phone conversations. Loneliness, I thought, or maybe caution. We met more in passing now, little moments charged with attention neither of us acknowledged aloud. I'd noticed the brush of her shoulder when she leaned over to pick up a package, or the warmth radiating from her hand when she rested it near mine on the stair railing. I told myself it was nothing, but my fingers remembered it long after she'd walked away. "You seem distracted today," she said once, standing closer than necessary in the small kitchen of her apartment. Her breath carried faint traces of coffee and something floral, and I realized I could count the tiny movements she made, The shift of her weight, the brief curl of her fingers against the counter, like I was memorizing her without permission. I guess I am, I muttered, hoping my face didn't betray more than I intended. She smiled softly, a curl at the corner of her lips that suggested she knew exactly what I was hiding. She lingered, leaning just enough that I could feel her presence almost pressing into me, before retreating with a subtle grace, as if testing the line we weren't supposed to cross. There was a risk here, not just the age difference, though that was glaring, her maturity, her world-weariness against my fumbling eagerness. There was the whisper of judgment from neighbors, the shadow of what people might think. And yet, even with that knowledge, I found myself drawn to her, drawn into a gravity that made me stumble over my own caution. I caught myself staring once too long, watching the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and she noticed. Her eyes flicked up, met mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and fragile curiosity. Then, almost imperceptibly, her hand brushed mine as she reached for a glass. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. It wasn't a bold move, nothing that could be called a declaration, but the current it sparked between us was undeniable. A pause hung in the air afterward, and we both seemed to lean into it, hesitant but unwilling to let it go. It was in that quiet, charged instant, just a touch, just a breath shared, that I realized we were already entangled. No words had been spoken, but I felt it, and I knew she did too. The connection was dangerous, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. And as she finally stepped back, her eyes lingering on mine a fraction too long, I knew this was only the beginning. The hallway smelled faintly of rain and asphalt that evening, and I lingered near her door longer than I should have. She was bent over a stack of papers, the light from the lamp catching the strands of silver in her hair, and for a moment I thought I might freeze right there, caught between wanting to step closer and knowing I shouldn't. "Do you need help?" I asked softly, my voice almost swallowed by the quiet of the apartment. She straightened, and the shift of her body brought her a fraction nearer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her, close enough that my hand itched to brush against hers again. But then, the unexpected, the beep of a phone on the counter startled both of us. She glanced at it, a subtle frown knitting her brows, and I realized how exposed we were. "Just a message," she said, and it was easy to believe, though I felt the tension thicken between us. I wanted to ask who, why, but the words stayed lodged in my throat. Instead, we stood there, side by side, caught in that narrow stretch of air that existed only for us. Her presence pressed against me in ways I couldn't articulate. The curve of her shoulder, the slight incline of her head when she looked up, the soft warmth that hit me with every breath she took. All of it made my pulse accelerate. I thought about stepping forward, about the impossibility of resisting, but guilt and caution pulled me back. "Careful," she murmured, almost to herself. I heard the unspoken warning behind the word. This was dangerous. Yet, her eyes flicked to mine and held, longer than they had before, closer, and I thought, maybe for a heartbeat, that she might lean in. The moment stretched. Heartbeats. A pause that seemed to slow time. My chest tightened, every nerve alert, every thought consumed by the near imperceptible movement of her fingers brushing mine as she reached for the same page. Our hands lingered there, hovering, before she pulled hers back just enough. A sigh, soft, almost inaudible, escaped her lips. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, we just held each other's gaze, the room shrinking until it was just us, isolated from judgment, from rules, from time itself. And then, the complication of our reality intruded again, a distant laugh from the hall, a neighbor returning. She stepped back immediately, smoothing the crease in her blouse, and I felt the sudden weight of everything unsaid, everything forbidden. Yet even as we moved apart, our proximity lingered. I could still feel her warmth brushing against me. She tilted her head slightly, eyes darting to mine with that same silent pull, the same dangerous invitation. I resisted moving closer, telling myself I shouldn't, yet my body betrayed me, inching just a fraction nearer. For a suspended second, we were closer than ever, drawn together by something neither of us wanted to name aloud. And in that stillness, I realized it didn't matter who might see, what was right or wrong. The gravity between us was undeniable, pulling, insistent, and terrifying all at once. The apartment felt smaller than ever, every shadow cast by the single lamp stretching long across the floor, as if it were holding us in place. She stood by the window, rain tapping softly against the glass, and I couldn't stop watching. The way her fingers traced the curtain hem, the subtle shift of her weight from one foot to the other. I noticed everything, my chest tight, my pulse uneven. I can't. I shouldn't, she whispered, almost to herself. Her voice carried that familiar mix of control and vulnerability that always made my stomach clench. But her eyes didn't leave mine, and I knew she wasn't really trying to speak to me. She was trying to speak to herself. I know, I said, my voice low, trembling slightly despite my effort to stay steady. I stepped closer, careful, hesitant. Every movement seemed to echo, loud in the silence. My hand hovered near her, aching to brush the hair from her face, to let my fingers trace the line of her jaw. She shivered at the proximity, and I swore it wasn't the draft from the rain. I shouldn't feel this way, she murmured, but the confession hung between us, raw and undeniable. I reached out anyway, letting my hand brush her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her skin through the fabric. She didn't pull away, and the weight of her closeness made my knees weak. Her breath brushed my ear as she shifted, leaning into me just a fraction, enough that the heat of her body pressed against mine, subtle but consuming. I can't stop thinking about you, I admitted, voice catching. It wasn't a question, it wasn't a plea. It was a truth that had been clawing at me for weeks. I saw the flicker in her eyes, the way her lips parted slightly, and I felt that same desperate pull reflected in her gaze. For a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. Just her, just me, suspended in that fragile bubble of desire and hesitation. My hand moved to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and the faintest shiver ran through her. I wanted to say more, wanted to confess everything, to tell her that all my thoughts, all my nights, were occupied by her. But the words lodged in my throat, replaced by the ache of what could happen, or what we might lose. Then she leaned closer, just slightly, the brush of her lips near mine sending a jolt through me. The moment teetered, impossibly balanced between surrender and retreat. My breath caught, heart hammering in my chest, every nerve alive with anticipation. And just as the space between us seemed about to collapse into inevitability, the first kiss hanging in the air, inevitable and trembling, the sound of the door creaking open shattered the bubble. A shadow fell across the threshold. She froze. I froze. The world outside rushed back in. And yet, even with interruption, we didn't step apart. Not fully. Not yet. I had barely caught my breath from the moment by the window when she spoke, her voice low, almost hesitant, but carrying a weight that made my stomach drop. "There's something you should know," she said, eyes darting to mine, and then away, tracing some invisible line across the room. The air felt suddenly heavier, as if the apartment itself had leaned closer to eavesdrop. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. My hands itched to reach for her, to ground us both, but I stayed still. She swallowed. "Someone overheard us the other day." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, knuckles whitening. "I didn't mean for anyone to know how how we feel." A rush of heat climbed my neck, part embarrassment, part shock. My pulse thudded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. I stepped just a fraction closer, careful, aware of the space between us shrinking like a living thing. "And," I prompted, voice barely more than a whisper. She hesitated, then let her gaze meet mine again. "They think I've been reckless. She trailed off, biting her lip, and the air between us vibrated with everything unsaid. My hand moved almost unconsciously to her arm, feeling the slight tremor beneath the fabric, the warmth pulsing from her body. Her reaction was instinctive. She leaned into me for balance, the movement soft, natural, intimate, and I froze for a second, trapped between wanting to pull back and never letting her go. My fingertips brushed the curve of her shoulder, a tiny, forbidden contact that made her inhale sharply, eyes darkening. "I don't care what they think," I murmured, low, deliberate, my voice trembling despite my control. She turned just slightly, just enough that our sides brushed. My chest pressed against hers, but I didn't move forward, not yet. The risk only made it more intoxicating. Her hand hovered near mine, fingers twitching like they wanted to find the touch they had been denied. She stepped back and then forward again, caught in the tug between caution and desire. I could feel every inch of her hesitation, the subtle shifts of her weight, the quickening of her breath, and it was all mirrored in me. "You don't understand," she whispered finally, voice tight, almost breaking. I've tried to be careful, but I can't. Not with you." Her gaze flicked down, then back up, holding mine like a promise and a warning all at once. I swallowed hard, and in that instant I realized we had crossed some invisible line. Nothing would be the same after this. Desire and fear twisted together, pulling us closer even as the world pressed in from every side. Then she made a small, decisive movement, a step forward, just close enough that our bodies were aligned, her shoulder brushing mine, our breaths mingling in that tiny space. The tension between us crackled like electricity, raw and inevitable. "I don't want to wait any longer," I said, my voice low, trembling with anticipation and resolve. Her eyes widened, lips parting. For a heartbeat, time hung between us. And then the pull, unavoidable, insistent, made the next move inevitable. The room felt impossibly small, the shadows from the lamp pooling around us like they were conspiring to hold us together. She stood mere inches away, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the rain-damp air, making my senses spin. I could see the quick inhale of her breath, the subtle tremor in her fingers, the way her eyes searched mine as if seeking permission or daring me to deny her. She started, voice low, almost breaking, then stopped. The hesitation itself was loud, a confession held in a single pause. I stepped closer, careful not to overstep, but every instinct in me urged forward. "I don't want to step back," I murmured, barely above a whisper, though my heart pounded like a drum. Her lips parted slightly. The light caught the curve of her jaw, the soft incline of her cheek, and I wanted nothing more than to reach for her, to bridge the space that felt both endless and impossibly small. She leaned just a fraction closer, and the heat of her body pressed into me, gentle yet consuming, a tension that made every nerve alive. "I've tried to keep it in check," she confessed, voice barely audible, trembling. "But I can't. Not with you. Not anymore." Her hand lifted almost instinctively, brushing against mine, a ghost of a touch that carried everything she didn't say. My chest tightened. The world had narrowed to that single motion. I moved slightly closer, and she didn't pull away. She let the nearness stay, let it linger, and I realized she wanted the same as I did. Yet fear and caution still clung to her like a second skin. We were caught in that suspended space, bodies aligned, breaths mingling, eyes locked. Every heartbeat was loud, every small movement amplified. The brush of her hair across her shoulder, the slight tilt of her head, the rise and fall of her chest. I whispered her name, and she shivered, a fragile acknowledgement of what we had been circling for weeks. "I don't care," I said, voice hoarse raw. "I want this. I want you." She looked at me then, fully, her eyes dark and glimmering with the same intensity one felt, a mirror of every pulse in my chest. The hesitation, the fear, the doubts, all of it fell away in the space between us. She reached up, fingers resting lightly against my cheek, and I leaned into her touch. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, it was human, it was messy, but it was enough. For the first time, clarity settled over us, not in words but in proximity, in the shared weight of desire held in check and now surrendered. I could feel her warmth, her breath brushing mine, the subtle tremor that matched my own. And in that suspended instant, we understood each other completely. Every hesitation, every unspoken longing, every risk we had dared to take. Nothing needed to be said. The choice had been made. The gravity between us was undeniable, and for the first time, we didn't resist it. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, leaving the world washed clean, quiet, and soft. Inside, the apartment felt different, lighter somehow, as if the tension that had held us taut for weeks had finally uncoiled. We sat on the couch, shoulders brushing, fingers tentatively intertwined, a delicate intimacy that needed no words. She leaned her head against mine, and I felt the steady warmth of her hair, the faint scent of her perfume, the quiet rhythm of her breath that had always drawn me in. I could hear the subtle catch in her inhale, the same shiver I'd noticed countless times before, and it no longer made my heart race with anxiety, only with relief and contentment. I was scared, she whispered, voice low but steady. Of everything. Of what people would think, of how I'd feel, of losing control. I know, I said softly, brushing my thumb along the back of her hand. Me too. But we didn't step back. We didn't let it go. We stayed. Her fingers tightened around mine, a small, confident grip that carried all the reassurance I could ever need. She shifted closer, and our knees pressed together. I could feel the subtle press of her body, the soft warmth radiating toward me, and it was grounding, real, undeniable. We stayed like that for a long moment, just breathing, just being, letting the world outside fade. No grand gestures, no words that needed to be carefully measured. Only presence, only connection. Then, almost imperceptibly, she tilted her head up, and I pressed my forehead gently against hers. Our eyes closed, breaths mingling, and I realized, this was it. The age gap, the hesitation, the doubts, none of it mattered here. We had chosen each other, fully, messy, human, and beautiful in our imperfection. I'm glad we didn't wait any longer, she murmured, a soft smile curving her lips. Me too, I replied, feeling a swell of warmth that had nothing to do with the rain and everything to do with her. We lingered, hands still intertwined, bodies close but comfortable, like two halves finally finding their balance. There was no rush, no need to define the future in precise words. Right now, this quiet, shared space, the gentle brush of skin and the unspoken understanding, was enough. And as the rain trailed off completely, leaving a faint scent of wet earth, I knew we had crossed every boundary that had held us back. We were together, and it felt grounded, real, lasting.